little girl's plea at the market moved a cold-hearted millionaire to tears. The story that followed changed his life forever. The weekend market was packed. The sound of knives hitting cutting boards clinked sharply. Vendors' calls stretched long. Smoke from grilled meat mixed with the scent of ripe oranges. Jonathan Hale, dressed in a black suit, strode quickly past the rows of stalls. Sunlight caught the steel watch on his wrist, flashing briefly. A small hand suddenly clutched that wrist. "Please help me. My mom is very sick." He froze. The little girl's hair was hastily tied, her backpack torn, clutching a rag doll with loose stitches. Her eyes were wet yet steady. "Where?" he asked, his voice flat. "Right there." The girl tugged his hand, weaving through the crowd. He didn't shake her off, matching his pace to shield her. After a short distance, the girl faltered, clutching her tiny chest, struggling for breath. The crowd pressed together, no way forward. Up, Jonathan bent down, lifted the girl, and carried her on his back. She clung tightly to his collar, the rag doll bumping against his shoulder with every step. He angled left to avoid a cart, tucking his elbow in to keep from hitting baskets of fruit. His breathing stayed steady, his stride long. His voice was low and clipped. "Tell me the way." The girl leaned and pointed. "Turn down the left alley. The wooden door. The one with clothes hanging in front." The alley was dark. Puddles streaking the ground. Moss climbed the damp walls. Wet laundry lines drooped at head height. A rickety wooden door opened with a squeal of rusted hinges. Inside, Isabel Ruiz, the girl's mother, lay curled on an old spring bed. Her breathing was shallow, shoulders rising and falling faintly. The small room was run down. A kerosene stove sat in the middle of the floor, its mouth blackened, a frying pan caked with old grease. The sink was nothing more than a cracked plastic basin, filled with cloudy water, suds mixed with grains of rice. At the window, cracked glass was patched with strips of tape, letting wind whistle through. On a sagging wooden shelf sat chipped plastic cups and an uncapped box of salt. In the corner, a desk fan rattled, one blade chipped. Children's clothes hung on a line. The clutter was messy, yet it had been cleaned with effort. Jonathan knelt by the bed, pressing 2 fingers to Isabel's wrist. Weak pulse. He opened a small table cheap medicine bottles with loose caps, a crumpled prescription with faded ink, and a doctor's appointment card crossed out with the note, "No insurance yet. Call an ambulance." He dialed, speaking clearly. Female, about 35, shortness of breath, dizziness, slipping in and out. Address alley number. Wooden door. Clothesline in front. Val. The girl dropped to her knees. "Mom." Isabel didn't respond. Thin foam gathered at her lips, her chest heavy with effort. Val burst into sobs, trembling. Jonathan removed his jacket, folded it as a pillow beneath Isabel's head, and lifted her chin to clear the airway. He placed the doll into Val's hands. "Hold this. Look into its eyes. Breathe slowly." Val nodded, clutching the doll tightly, her gaze locked on her mother. He stood by the doorframe, cracking it open for air. A neighbor peeked in. "No trouble, is there?" Jonathan gave a short nod, closed the door further to keep warmth in, offering no explanation. Sirens pierced the alley, growing closer. 2 paramedics pushed in a stretcher. Wheels screeched on the uneven floor. "Hold her head." Jonathan supported Isabel's shoulders, sliding his hand down her back to lift. Val ran close, her little shoes splashing puddles. Vendors moved aside, fruit baskets wobbling, an orange rolling away before stopping. "Who's the patient's family?" one paramedic asked. "She lives alone. I'm the one who found her. Let me ride along." Jonathan's voice stayed even. He looked at Val. "You can come. Stay close." They placed Isabel on the stretcher. Straps clicked shut. Val clutched her mother's hand, lips trembling, eyes fixed. The ambulance doors closed, the cramped space filled with the white ceiling light flickering slightly. Beep, beep. Steady. Val sat in the passenger seat, lips moving as she counted each beep. Jonathan steadied himself against the rail as the ambulance swerved. The girl pressed the doll into his palm. You hold it, so I can be strong. He nodded, holding the soft toy in his hand, feeling as though he was holding a promise. Tell me about your mom, he said quietly, eyes on the monitor. Val took a breath, speaking slowly, piece by piece. Mom wakes before dawn. She scrubs staircases in an office building. At noon, she washes dishes in a diner. At night, she sews clothes at home. Sometimes she falls asleep at the table. She always saves the bread for me. She says, tomorrow will be better. But lately she's been tired, chest hurts, coughing. She said it's nothing, just rest. Jonathan didn't interrupt. He checked Isabel's breathing, noting the color of her lips. His phone buzzed nonstop. The name Carmen flashed. He silenced it, eyes on the monitor, thumb typing quickly. 2 patients, arrange temporary insurance. Val saw the screen light up, then dim. Her voice shrank. Please don't let them take Mom far away from me. The ambulance braked hard at the curb. Doors swung open. Yellow ER lines glowed bright outside. Val stumbled, nearly falling, but Nurse Linda Shaw caught her, a hand steady on her shoulder. I'm Linda. You come with me. Your mom's being treated right away. At the reception desk, are you the patient's relative? Jonathan paused briefly, then signed the form. I'll take temporary responsibility. Ink still wet left a glossy streak on the paper. The stretcher turned behind white curtains. Val looked up. Please don't leave. Jonathan glanced at his steel watch, turned the face inward on his wrist, and silenced another incoming call. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. An unfinished note, the frosted glass doors closed. 3 figures overlapped in reflection like a photo missing its frame. Ramirez tore off a pre-printed instruction sheet, marked the key lines, clipped it into place. Back in 3 days, or sooner if symptoms worsen. She'll be under short-term observation overnight. He slipped his pen into his pocket, nodded, and moved on to the next room. Val wanted water. They walked past the bulletin board near the vending machines. A yellowed sheet of paper, corners curled, held by rusted pins, tilted in one corner. The worst of the emergency had passed. They still had to wait to see if things would truly stabilize. She's doing better now, Linda said softly. Val exhaled, her quick breaths slowing into longer ones. She nodded, lips moving but asking no questions, as if afraid to break the fragile calm just restored. At the intake desk, the financial officer slid a stack of forms forward. Jonathan picked up the pen, signing where needed. The ink shimmered wet, leaving a faint halo before spreading. Val set the rag doll on the edge of the table so she could pull her mother's papers from the backpack. Jonathan took the role of responsible party simply because a name was required, and he could provide one. Does the patient have insurance? Temporary coverage is being activated, Jonathan replied. Note employer, sponsored, effective today. His voice was even, neither high nor low. The clerk nodded. A red stamp came down with a heavy thud. The printer whirred, swallowed paper, then spat out a folded sheet of instructions. Plastic chairs lined up in rows, the backs polished smooth with wear. Val hugged the doll again, then set it on Jonathan's lap. You hold it. He kept it in place, not clutching it, just resting a hand on top to keep it from slipping. He fed coins into the machine and brought back 2 cups of coffee. The one for Val was still warm. He handed it to her first. The other cooled slowly in his hand. At the top was a logo. Jonathan recognized an H in stylized form. The words, Hail Health Initiative beneath. And in bold letters blurred with age, program suspended. Years ago, a boardroom decision had cut funding and closed a chapter. Today, they stood before that same notice. Uncle, that name looks like yours, Val said, pointing at Hale, a dot of blue ink on her fingernail. Jonathan paused a beat. Yes. He smoothed the edge of the paper once, then let go. He tapped his pen on the plastic edge, counting off beats to remember rest, full meals, regular medication, report at once if tired, dizzy, or in chest pain. The diagnosis passed through their ears as dry syllables dilated cardiomyopathy. The plan began with small, repeated steps. "Stable for now," he said, looking at Val. "You may stay close to your mother, but you must also eat and sleep." "Doctor, may I have the follow-up schedule, prescription, and other information?" Jonathan asked. The ceiling fan turned slowly, its breeze rustling the paper with a soft crackle. This was a humanitarian program I had to shut down because of budget deficits, and too many exploited it for profit, leaving those who truly needed it with nothing. "Like my mom?" Val asked. Jonathan nodded. Inside the room, Isabel stirred. When Val and Jonathan returned, she opened her eyes. Val, who had dozed on his shoulder, bolted awake at the sound of shoes and ran to the bed, gripping her mother's hand. Jonathan stepped back half a pace, still within their sightline. "Thank you for staying," Isabel said hoarsely, words broken. "We have work to do," Jonathan replied. He didn't say it's all right or don't worry. He spoke in terms he knew: tasks. He moved into the hall, dialing Carmen, lowering his voice. "Temporary insurance package, effective today. Find safe housing near the hospital. Prepare internal hiring papers, flexible hours. Expense report by end of day." "Understood, on it." "What happened, boss?" Carmen's tone was crisp before the line cut with a faint pop. Jonathan slid the phone back into his pocket, turning the watch face inward as he had at the ER doors. "I'll explain later. I'm a little busy," he murmured. The doctor left the ward. Val sat in a chair, holding a cup of milk Linda had just given her. Jonathan stepped closer, standing beside the bed. He said to Isabel, "I need someone to coordinate household matters. Flexible hours, insurance for you and your daughter. You may rest when necessary. If you agree, the first day starts today." The offer sounded like a contract, yet it opened the outline of a new life. Isabel looked at Val. The girl nodded, slow and firm, eyes fixed on her mother's hand. Isabel turned back, speaking softly. "Yes." Jonathan nodded once. "No more." Linda handed over a folded sheet on diet and rest. Val read each line aloud, like reciting a dictation. Jonathan's coffee had gone cold. He turned his watch face inward again, his phone still muted. They left the ER to complete short-term admission papers. The stretcher wheels squeaked on the floor. The elevator chimed. Doors opened. Light from the long corridor spilled in as a narrow band. The doors shut. Their story slid into a new chapter, slow but steady, following the steady beeps behind the curtain. The hospital doors closed behind them. Val hugged the doll in the back seat. Isabel leaned against the seat, hand on her chest. Jonathan buckled in, started the car. They meant to return to the old lodging, but that room was too small, too damp, and too far from the hospital. "Val, where do you live?" Jonathan asked, eyes on the road. "In the alley by the market, near the orange cellar," Val answered. Jonathan nodded, then shook his head slightly. "That place isn't suitable for your mother's health right now. Would you both stay at my place, just for now?" Val bit her lip to hold back a cheer, but her tone still lifted at the end. "Yes, sir." Isabel turned, voice faint. "Would that be all right, sir?" "Don't be formal. It's quiet there better for you," Jonathan answered gently. The car left the lot, joining the city flow. A life-shifting decision had begun with a 10-word sentence. The gate opened with a card. The stone-paved yard was even. The trees were clipped into neat green blocks. The steps smelled faintly of freshly polished wood. Val stopped before an abstract painting in the foyer. "This looks like rain, but it doesn't feel wet," she whispered. Isabel noticed the leather shoes lined neatly on the rack. Her breathing deepened, no longer shallow. "This house is so big," Val murmured. "It's quiet here. You'll rest easier." Jonathan replied. The day shift housekeeper straightened. Welcome home, sir. Good evening, ma'am, young miss. She bowed lightly to Isabel and Val, careful not to look too long, to spare them discomfort. Silence had a sound here. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint creak of wood beneath shoes. On the refrigerator door was a magnet note, 1000, medicine. Jonathan stood in the kitchen. The flame was a little high. Eggs hissed, edges turning golden. Please, a little lower flame, sir, Val said, tiptoeing to turn the knob. Isabel sat at the table, back straight, watching her own breathing. On the table sat a cup of warm water, steam rising thin. Jonathan took a marker and wrote in a notebook by the stove. Low flame equals soft eggs. The eggs weren't pretty, but smelled good. For the first time that day, they ate at the same table. The first meal wasn't good, but it was warm enough. Carmen came. She opened an A4 planner, neatly divided into boxes. I'd like to mark rest time in blue and medication time in yellow, she said. She added doctor's numbers, the shortest route to St. Michael's, and a weekly menu with easy-to-digest dishes. The colored stickers spread across the table like tiles laying out a path. Jonathan scanned them once. Carmen, keep us on this rhythm, he said. Isabel read each item, her finger tracing along. Every small square was a piece of piece fitted together. Val stood curiously in the doorway. The room was spacious and tidy. On the dark wooden desk lay a file folder with the Hale Health Initiative logo, stamped suspended in red. Val tilted her head. Uncle, those letters look like the ones at the hospital. Jonathan glanced over, then closed the drawer. Yes, that's something from the past, dear. Old decisions were calling his name now. The call was faint, but it lingered. The next morning, they stopped in front of Lincoln Elementary. Parents lined up along the sidewalk. The 1B classroom sign hung crooked. May I go into class now? Val asked, clutching her backpack strap. A boy ran past, loud enough for her to hear, You don't have a dad. Val froze. Her chin lowered half an inch. Isabel placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her voice gentle. Go on inside, honey. I'll be right here. Jonathan stood back. He didn't step in. His steel watch face turned inward against his wrist. At his feet, a hair tie rolled on the ground. He bent to pick it up, slipped it into his pocket. Pain in public places often speaks quietly. But it stays. A screen projected stock charts. The reporter's voice was steady but tense. Jonathan's phone buzzed. A short message from Carmen. Val cried at the gate. Jonathan looked up from the file. Excuse me, everyone. I need to pause this meeting for 15 minutes, he said firmly. We're at a critical point, a colleague frowned. I'll be back right after. Thank you, Jonathan replied. For the first time, the conference room witnessed an empty space created by something outside of work, a space for a man to be a father in his own way. Dismissal time. The noise broke out like small waves. Val rushed from the classroom door. Missed a step. Her hands clutched her stomach. She slowly collapsed onto the cement. Isabel cried out softly. Jonathan rushed forward, dropped to one knee, and called, Val, look at me. Breathe slowly, sweetheart. I'm right here, Isabel urged, her trembling hand on her daughter's back. Cold sweat beaded on Val's forehead. Her rag doll tumbled from the backpack, landing at Jonathan's feet. The morning's words had pierced her heart. Lunch was barely touched. A small body reacted the only way it knew. Someone please call 911, a parent shouted. A siren wailed in the distance, drawing closer like a tightening string. Jonathan pulled off his tie, folded it under Val's head for a cushion. His other hand shielded her eyes from the sun. He whispered, I'm right here with you. Don't be afraid. Red ambulance lights reflected on the school windows, sliding past like a streak of paint. The siren grew nearer, sweeping the edge of the chapter, opening a night that might be long, The ambulance doors burst open. The red light slid off the school windows and faded along the hospital curb. The gurney rattled quickly across the yellow line. Val gripped her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Isabel's eyes fluttered open, then closed again. Her breath shallow. Jonathan walked close beside, one hand holding the rail, the other carrying the tiny worn backpack. They returned to St. Michael's. This time, the younger one lay in the bed beside her mother. The night stretched longer. Nurse Linda waited at the end of the hall. "Good evening. Pediatrics has a monitoring bed. Please follow me." Her voice was warm, steady, like a night lamp. She placed a smiley face sticker on Val's IV line. "Val, you're very brave." "Thank you, ma'am," Val replied, watching Linda's hands as she adjusted the tube. Dr. Diego Ramirez stepped out from behind the curtain, chart in hand. He looked at Val, gave Isabel and Jonathan a slight nod. This was fainting caused by low blood sugar, along with prolonged stress, he explained clearly. Tonight she needs rest, light food, and closer glucose monitoring. "Doctor, what should we do right now?" Jonathan asked, his voice steady. "Just give her warm milk, a few salted crackers. I'll order quick tests and monitor until morning." He jotted notes, tore off an instruction slip. "Any unusual signs? Ring the bell." The words became real through small objects, a paper cup, a pack of crackers, a red call button. The vending machine rattled. Jonathan slid in money. The cocoa can got stuck. He tapped once. No movement. He switched hands, tapped again. The can clattered into the tray. Isabel let out a quiet laugh. "You won against the machine today." "Thank you," Jonathan said, handing the can to Val. "Take small sips, honey." Val nodded. "Thank you, Uncle." She placed the doll on her lap, held the can with both hands, and took a deep breath before drinking. Warmth spread from her palms up to her cheeks. In the room, the monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Linda tucked a thin blanket over Val's legs, pulled up a chair for Isabel beside the bed. Jonathan dragged the remaining plastic chair close to the head of the bed, quietly loosened his tie, rolled it, and slipped it into his coat pocket. He laid his coat over the back of the chair, ready for anyone who felt cold. Jonathan didn't say he would stay. He simply acted as though he had already been there. Long before everything began, Isabel looked at her daughter, then at Jonathan. "Thank you for being here with us." "Being here is what matters," Jonathan answered softly. "Please get some rest. I'll watch over Val." Out in the hallway, the sound of cartwheels rattled softly across the vinyl floor. Val dozed, drifting in and out of a restless dream, mumbling a few faint words. When the first evening rain began to patter lightly on the glass roof, she suddenly spoke in a whisper, thin as a thread. "Daddy." Both Isabel and Jonathan heard it. Isabel froze for half a beat, then reached out to stroke her daughter's hair. Jonathan neither denied nor corrected the name. He simply leaned in a little, letting his body block the glare of the overhead light shining into Val's eyes. In silences like this, explanations are often clumsy. A shoulder can be answer enough. A phone vibrated in the coat pocket. Jonathan pulled it out, silenced the ring. He typed a short message to Carmen. "Push all meetings past 10 a.m. tomorrow. Please send an apology email for me." He set the phone face down in the corner of the table and pulled his chair closer. "Do you need to go home for anything?" Isabel asked quietly. "Thank you, I'm fine," Jonathan replied. He smiled slightly, as if to reassure her this was no great sacrifice. The night slipped by in fragments. Val finished another half cup of milk. Isabel dozed off for a moment and startled awake to check her child. Linda came in to take a glucose reading and reset the patch on her hand. Jonathan walked out to the water dispenser, filled both cups, and returned with steady steps. Near dawn, the sky above the glass roof shifted to a pale gray. Linda gently drew back the curtain. "Val's numbers are better," she said softly, resting a hand on the edge of the bed. "She can go home today, but she'll need full rest." "Thank you, Nurse Linda," Val murmured, still sleepy. She reached for her doll. and found Jonathan's hand already placing it on the edge of her blanket. Jonathan bent closer. "I'm here. Don't leave again," Val said, clearer than before. "I'll stay with you," Jonathan answered. He spoke slowly and firmly, as if signing an important document. Isabel smiled faintly. Her color had returned, a bit warmer. She tucked the blanket around her daughter, leaned back in the chair, eyes still fixed on Val. Linda handed over a trifold sheet of paper. "These are the instructions for today and the coming days," she explained. "Please pay close attention to the sections on snacks and naps." "We thank you," Isabel replied. She opened the paper, read line by line, nodding at items she had already heard the night before. The phone buzzed softly on the table. A message from Carmen lit up. "I found a flyer in Val's backpack. This Friday, Class 1B has a small stage program. Sending you the picture." Below was a photo of a wrinkled school flyer, with the words printed, "The Greenleaf Play, 6:00 p.m., Lincoln Auditorium." Jonathan looked at it for a beat longer. He turned to Val. "Val, you have a play on Friday. Do you want to perform?" Val pushed herself up with her hands, her eyes bright as she remembered. "Yes, I'm the tree," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "I practiced standing still for a long time." "We'll be there," Jonathan said. He turned politely to Isabel. "We can arrange for her to rest well before the play." The monitor's beeping remained steady, but inside that rhythm was now another pulse, the beat of a small plan for Friday evening. The sleepless night felt less cold, thanks to a crumpled flyer in a school bag. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky lightened with a thin brightness. Linda switched on the yellow morning lamp. The elevator chimed. They prepared to leave pediatrics, carrying with them only small, certain things, the rag doll, the trifold instruction sheet, and a promise spoken aloud. The school bell rang twice. Lincoln Elementary's auditorium opened early. The air smelled of fresh cardboard, clear tape, and drying paint. Rows of plastic chairs were set neatly, their surfaces scratched from years of use. Jonathan laid his folded jacket on the chair beside him, his phone turned face down. Val wore her tree costume, a brown fabric trunk with green paper leaves taped on. She peeked out from the stage curtain. "May I practice one more breath?" Val asked. Her hands pressed to her stomach. "Take a deep breath and let it out slowly, just like at the hospital." "Thank you," Jonathan replied evenly. This was not just a small school skit. This was the first time the three of them sat together in one row as a family in their hearts. Behind the curtain, two parents leaned close. "Must be PR again," one said just loud enough. "The CEO at an elementary auditorium tomorrow. The news sites will have photos." A phone lifted, the lens flashing faintly. Carmen stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "May I remind everyone this is the children's stage. Please lower your voices so they feel confident." "Thank you," she said, polite but firm. Jonathan heard, but did not turn. He adjusted the string of leaves on Val's back, speaking gently. "Stand still the way you practiced. I respect how hard you've worked." Isabel thanked Carmen silently with her eyes. The whispers stayed outside their row, at least for tonight. It was Class 1B's turn. The spotlight was a little harsh. Val stepped out, paused a moment. Her eyes searched the front row. Jonathan raised his thumb, then lowered his hand in the signal for breathe. "Good evening, teacher and classmates. I am the tree." Val said her first line, her voice round and clear. The children around her laughed at the honest introduction. The play flowed smoothly. Applause began sparse, then swelled, steady as rain on a tin roof. Jonathan did not take photos. He simply clapped, in rhythm, without missing a beat. On stage, Val stood still in her role. In the audience, a man learned how to stand still in his place. The hallway smelled of fresh paint. A parent walked up, kept a polite tone but spoke with sharp words. "Mr. Hale, Your company once shut down the HHI program. That year, my sister lost her prenatal care support. Are you here tonight for photos or to correct an old decision? Jonathan looked straight ahead. I acknowledge that decision caused harm. I bear responsibility as part of the system that made it. He said clearly. Tonight, I affirm before you and everyone here I will propose reopening HHI. The man tightened his grip on the armrest. Can you be more specific? A pilot at St. Michael and nearby schools' basic cardiac screenings. A copay fund for prescriptions and a childcare corner during clinic visits, Jonathan replied. I will take responsibility for the budget and the roadmap. Carmen glanced up quickly, met Jonathan's eyes, and gave a small nod. A promise had become a commitment in front of witnesses. Jonathan leaned lightly against the wall, opened his phone and typed slowly. Subject: reinstate HHI. Pilot at St. Michael. Plus Lincoln Feeder School's proposal cut 25% of Q3 advertising budget tilde, $4.8 million rupees. To reallocate to HHI pilot fund. Scope 1 hospital plus 5 schools. KPIs: number of screenings completed, prescriptions co-paid, caregiver workdays saved, independent audit each quarter. Hearing scheduled 8:00 a.m. Monday. He pressed send. A small whoosh, like the ding of an elevator. Replies came immediately. Chair freeze the proposal until risk assessment for legal and shareholder implications. IR. 2 major shareholders request a call tonight. Legal. Please review public statements. Note risk of promissory estoppel. Jonathan called out quietly. Carmen, please lock in 8:30 p.m. online with the chair and shareholders. Prepare a risk map, Q&A scenarios, and an alternate cost-cutting plan. We'll explain thoroughly. Yes, I'll prepare right away, Carmen answered. This moment had its price. Stocks might dip, the meeting might tighten. But a child had just stood strong under the lights. There were other values that mattered more. Light rain speckled outside the awning. Jonathan draped his suit jacket over Isabel's shoulders. The night air is chilly. Please wear this, he said. Isabel nodded softly. Val hopped over a small puddle, then turned back to take Jonathan's hand. Uncle, if you came to pick me up every day like today, I'd be so happy, she said clearly. Jonathan bent to meet her eyes. I would like to come every day, if you'll allow me, he said. Yes, I'd like that, Val replied, gripping his hand tighter. Isabel looked at them both, her eyes wet. I'm so grateful for your presence, she said. Jonathan gave a faint smile. I thank you both for giving me the chance to be here. His phone buzzed repeatedly. PR local blog posts, photo CEO hail in front row, PR stunt or remorse. IR activist shareholder issues, open letter opposing budget reallocation. Legal advise no public comment until board session. Carmen asked. Do you want to delay the internal announcement until after the meeting? Thank you, Carmen. Tonight we won't issue a press release, Jonathan said. Please send a brief internal note. Board will hear HHI reinstatement proposal Monday morning. No public comment until then. Also schedule L.D. for frontline managers on speech protocol. Understood, Carmen replied. The waves had spotted them, but they had an awning, and the one seeking shelter from rain was no longer standing alone. Val reached into her backpack, pulled out the worn rag doll, and slipped it into Jonathan's suit pocket. Uncle, I'd like to lend you this doll until Monday. It will keep you strong, she said solemnly. Jonathan placed his hand over his pocket. Thank you. I'll carry it with me, he answered. Isabel smiled and exhaled deeply. Tonight they held both a plan for the community and a small charm of their own. Before leaving, Jonathan stopped at the bulletin board in the hallway. The Greenleaf Play flyer was pinned over an old notice, its edges curled, faintly bearing the Hail Health Initiative logo with the words, funding suspended. He pulled out a rusty tack, straightened the old sheet, and pinned it back neatly. My dear, On Monday we will try to reopen a door that was once closed, Jonathan said softly, just loud enough for Val. Yes, I hear you, Val replied. The hallway lights dimmed, row by row. Outside, the rain had stopped. They stepped into the night, carrying a rag doll in a pocket and an email that could not be recalled. The morning after the play, the kitchen glowed with a yellow light. On the table, a warm glass of water, a plate of eggs with browned edges. Val peeled paper leaves still sticky with glue. Isabel slowly practiced her breathing, hand resting on her chest. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, a fountain pen laid across. On a small card, he wrote 3 short lines: pick up, stay, be near. He was not a man of many words. 3 verbs were enough to remind him what he must do in the long day ahead. The doorbell rang. Carmen stepped in with a bundle of files tied with thin-string emergency contact forms, medical power of attorney for Val, and a household coordination contract for Isabel with the note, "Insurance immediate." "Allow me to explain briefly," Carmen said. "This one authorizes the school to contact Mr. Jonathan when needed. This one gives the hospital permission to accept his signature in emergencies, and this one is a flexible hours agreement." "Thank you, Carmen," Jonathan said. "We'll go through them in order." Isabel sat upright, reading each line, steadying her hands. "I am very grateful," she said softly. Val stood beside her, hugging the rag doll, leaning in to peer at the red stamp on the last page as if it were a rare stamp. Papers don't warm a home, but they allow those within it to stand close together, legally. Judge Eleanor Brooks's office carried the scent of polished wood and damp paper. Sunlight slanted through the shutters, cutting into distinct strips of light across the desk. Judge Brooks stepped away from the bookshelf, smiling. "Let's sit here by the window where it's warm," she said, pointing to the row of chairs. Val sat in the middle, her doll resting on her lap. Jonathan and Isabel sat on either side, their backs straight. "Today's procedure is for medical authorization and emergency contact for little Val," the judge said slowly, clearly. "It is not an adoption, but it will let the school and hospital know who can act on the mother's behalf if needed." "Yes, ma'am," Isabel replied. "I thank you." Jonathan nodded. "We are grateful for your guidance." Judge Brooks placed a clipboard in front of Jonathan. "Mr. Hale, before you sign, I would like to hear your promise. Please say it in the simplest words you can." Jonathan looked down at the small card he carried. "Ma'am, I promise 3 things," he said evenly. "I will pick Val up and drop her off on time. I will stay when she needs me. I will stand beside them in the daily matters from medicine to school plays." The judge smiled with her eyes. "Thank you. Those verbs are very clear." Isabel turned toward him, her gaze full of gratitude. Val looked up. "Ma'am, does that mean Uncle Jonathan will be with me when I'm scared of needles?" "Yes, dear," Judge Brooks nodded. "And the school may call him when necessary." Jonathan signed. The fountain pen made small clicking sounds each time it lifted from the paper. The dark blue ink was still wet, leaving a faint sheen. Judge Brooks pressed a firm red seal in the corner of the document. "That will do for now," she said. "If your family wishes to take a larger step later, we'll discuss it then." Val tilted her head. "Uncle, does this mean I'm officially your daughter now?" Jonathan lowered his voice. "Today we have papers that let me take care of you," he said. "As for being official, that is a big decision. If one day you wish it, and your mother agrees, we will prepare together." Val nodded, hugging her doll tighter. "Yes, I understand. Some answers need to come slowly enough for a 6-year-old heart to keep pace." A phone buzzed in Jonathan's coat pocket. IR. 83:0 p.m. call with shareholders. PR. Suggested silent statement. He turned his watch face inward, pressed mute. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Let's finish the paperwork." The judge watched his quiet gesture, gave a slight nod, as if marking an invisible plus in an unwritten file. That afternoon, they stopped at St. Michael's for Isabel's follow-up. Dr. Diego Ramirez checked her pulse, measured her blood pressure, asked a few more questions about her fatigue. "The new medication is working," he said, "but I want to take another look." The ultrasound room was dim, the lights lowered. Cool gel touched her abdomen. The monitor showed shadows of gray, dark, and light. A tiny flicker appeared like a faint star. Val held her breath. "Doctor, what is that blinking light?" "Doctor." Ramirez looked at Isabel, his voice warm. "Congratulations. Isabel is in early pregnancy." Isabel turned to Jonathan, her hand gripping the sheet's edge. "Doctor, with my heart condition, is it safe?" "We will take double precautions," Dr. Ramirez said. "We'll plan close monitoring, adjust medications, more rest, and absolutely avoid prolonged stress. I will coordinate with your cardiologist in obstetrics." He printed the ultrasound. The paper slid out, warm to the touch. Joy came with a thin outline of worry. Both stood side by side on the same sheet. They sat on the bench in the hallway. Val placed the ultrasound on her lap, her finger tapping the tiny blinking spot. "Mom, the baby is saying hello with a little light," she said. Isabel smiled through damp eyes. "I hear it," Jonathan spoke slowly. "We'll rearrange everything. Household work will be lighter. Medicine schedules and rest will come first, and if needed, I'll cut back more meetings." The phone buzzed again. Board invitation, 8:00 a.m. Monday, HHI. He read it for a beat, then turned off the screen. "Monday morning I will present. Tonight I am here," he said, looking to Isabel and then Val. Isabel nodded. "Thank you for choosing to stay." On the way to the parking lot, Jonathan slipped the ultrasound behind the red-stamped medical authorization. The two papers lined up evenly, like the start of a new family file. Val tucked the rag doll into his coat pocket. "Uncle, the doll will attend the meeting with you on Monday morning," she said solemnly. Jonathan placed his hand over the pocket. "Thank you, dear," he replied. On his phone, Monday morning was already waiting, but tonight they went home with a signed promise and a tiny flicker of light beating steadily. The story closed with the soft click of a car door and opened again with the faint heartbeat printed on white paper. Isabel poured ginger tea, setting it beside the laptop. Val picked up a crayon and drew a small leaf in the corner of the card. "Uncle, may I give you this leaf so you'll remember to breathe evenly like I practiced?" Val said. "Thank you," Jonathan replied with a smile. He placed the leaf next to the word stay. The words lost some of their sharpness once a child's leaf rested beside them. The plan was no longer just numbers. The screen displayed 3 squares. The chair wore thin glasses. The activist shareholder leaned toward the camera. Investor relations took notes. "Mr. Hale, please present the main risks." The chair began. "Legal and communication risks," Jonathan answered. "Mitigation measures, separate accounting for the pilot fund, independent audit, and a community oversight committee with representatives from St. Michael's and Lincoln School. Funding will come from cutting 25% of Q3 advertising, plus a reduction in my own bonus this year." The activist shareholder raised an eyebrow. "You confirm you'll voluntarily reduce your own bonus?" "Yes, sir," Jonathan said slowly. "I'll submit a signed addendum." The chair nodded. "Thank you. For Monday morning, please prepare Q&A for 3 groups: legal, profit, and measurement." Carmen placed 3 binders on the table: legal, finance, measurement. "Allow me to ask quickly, as in the boardroom," she said. "Go ahead." Jonathan nodded. Question 1: If the local blog keeps attacking us, how does our team respond? No public response before the board session. Internal release of principal notes, only. After the board approves, we'll publish the plan and pilot data. Carmen nodded. Question 2: KPIs. 3 KPIs: number of screenings, medication adherence rates, and reduction of caregiver workdays missed. Quarterly reports, open to audit. Isabel gathered papers to clear the table. From the middle of the stack slipped out an old yellowed envelope. stamped with the Hale Health Initiative logo. Its edge still bore a strip of dried tape. Jonathan paused. "Ma'am, this envelope is—" Isabel lifted it, inhaled softly. "This is the letter I sent 2 years ago," she said. "I asked for help with heart medication. The reply was polite but said the program was suspended." Carmen froze mid-motion. Jonathan kept his voice low. "I apologize for that decision. My signature is at the bottom of the suspension memo." Isabel shook her head. "I know it was a collective decision. Today, if you need an anonymous case to share in the boardroom, you may use my story. Please withhold my name." "We appreciate your permission," Jonathan said. Val hugged her doll, tilting her head. "Mom, that means we got to meet Uncle." Isabel smiled. "Yes, my love. A plot twist doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sits in a yellowed envelope, linking a damp rented room to a cold board table." The phone buzzed Dr. Ramirez. "If you need preliminary numbers for the proposal, I'm willing to sign. Cardiac ER visits rose 17% after HHI was suspended. I can join for 5 minutes online." "Thank you, doctor. I deeply appreciate it." Jonathan typed. "Please send a brief summary table." "I'll send it right away," Ramirez replied. Carmen looked over. "The community piece is in place." Val slept on the sofa, still clutching her doll. Isabel covered her with a blanket, then stepped quietly into the bedroom. Jonathan switched off the kitchen light, leaving only the wall lamp on. He tucked the small card of 3 words into his pocket, alongside the doll Val had given him. The wall clock ticked once. Inside the home was a kind of quiet that wasn't empty. Thin mist settled on the stone courtyard. Jonathan drove slowly. "Please put on your hat, dear," he said. "Yes, sir," Val answered, fastening the button carefully. Isabel touched his wrist lightly as she stepped out of the car. "I wish you a smooth presentation." "Thank you." "I'll be back to pick you up," Jonathan said. He glanced at the screenshot reminder. 1,000, medication, a note to himself. A glass-walled conference room, thick carpet, black leather chairs, a large screen displaying the words HHI pilot, proposal. Board members sat in a semicircle. The general counsel opened a binder. The CFO turned pages. The chair rested a hand on the table. Jonathan stood at the head. His steel watch face was turned inward against his wrist. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present the proposal to reinstate HHI under a pilot model," he said calmly. The first slide opened 3 simple columns. Why, how, measure. "Why?" Jonathan began. "First, demand beyond what families can afford. ER data at St. Michael's rose 17% after suspension. Second, the pilot cost equals 25% of Q3 advertising budget. Third, risks are limited through separate accounts and independent audits." The general counsel asked, "Have you considered the legal exposure from making promises in public?" "Ma'am, I have not promised the public. I only confirmed intent to reinstate before parents at the school. Tonight, PR will continue to maintain silence until there is a resolution," Jonathan replied. The CFO set down his pen. "Will the 25% cut be enough, or will it overrun?" "Sufficient for a 12-month pilot with 1 hospital and 5 schools," Jonathan said. "I propose a sunset clause. If KPIs are unmet, the program ends automatically." The chair tapped a pen lightly. "Thank you. Please present a brief real case." Jonathan looked around the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago, a letter requesting assistance received a suspension reply. The sender was a single mother. This week, I found that letter again on my kitchen table. Today, I bring that anonymous story as my answer to why now." No one spoke for several seconds. The chair nodded slowly. "Thank you for your candor." The activist shareholder asked, "Do you commit to cutting your personal bonus to offset risks, as you said in your email?" "Yes, sir, I commit," Jonathan replied, "and I propose freezing executive bonuses during the pilot quarter." Another member asked. Do you have a conflict of interest since a member of your household could benefit? Sir, I will recuse myself from any approval process involving my family, Jonathan said. All reviews will be conducted by a third party. The general counsel noted it down, sliding the binder toward the chair. The phone on the table buzzed. The screen flashed a video from Val. Uncle. I wish you calm. The baby says hello with a little light. Jonathan silenced it, but the corner of his mouth softened. I apologize for the interruption, he said to the room. We may proceed to the vote. The chair handed out small slips of paper. Pens clicked. Hands marked them one by one. From Jonathan's breast pocket, the rag doll peeked out slightly. In his wallet, the card with 3 words lay beside his access badge. Please place your votes into the leather folder, the chair instructed. The folder closed with a firm snap. The result was not yet read, but the heartbeat inside one man's chest had steadied again, a way of bracing for whatever number was about to be announced. The leather folder opened once more. The chair glanced across the marked boxes, set the pen down on the table, and spoke evenly. Ladies and gentlemen, the board approves the HHI pilot with a majority in favor. A number was given 7-4. The general counsel lifted her glasses, with 4 conditions attached. 1. Separate accounts and independent audit. 2. A sunset clause after 12 months if KPIs are not met. 3. Recusal from any approval of cases related to Mr. Hale's family. 4. No communications until there is an official announcement plan. The CFO tapped his pen. We will cut 25% of Q3 advertising exactly as proposed. Finance will issue the disbursement schedule. Jonathan straightened half an inch taller. I sincerely thank the board. I commit to fully comply with all 4 conditions, he said, his hand resting lightly on the table's edge. His steel watch turned inward. The number 7-4 was not large, but it was enough to open a door closed for 2 years. The conference room doors opened. Camera shutters clicked softly. 2 local reporters waited. Mr. Hale, may we have the result? Jonathan paused for exactly 1 beat. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a pilot decision with strict conditions. Communications will provide details once there is a formal resolution. Thank you for your interest, he said. Carmen stepped forward half a step, nodding in place of farewell, guiding the way down the hall. The words were polite enough to show respect, short enough to honor his promise to the general counsel. In the elevator, Jonathan took the card from his wallet. Pick up. Stay. Be near. He texted Isabel. The result passed 7-4. I'll pick up Val on time. 1,000 medication. The bell chimed. The door opened. His steps shifted, a touch quicker than when he had walked in. A small meeting room on the ground floor. The air smelled of fresh coffee. Dr. Diego Ramirez, Nurse Linda Shaw, Miss Park, Lincoln School counselor, and the parent who had questioned him on performance night sat around the table. Jonathan set down the binder. Good afternoon. The board has approved the pilot with 4 conditions. I'd like to hear input from the front line. Ramirez spoke first. I recommend basic cardiac screenings every Saturday morning, prioritizing children with symptoms and single parents. Linda added, please arrange a childcare corner near the waiting room, staffed with volunteers. That way parents can sign paperwork without worry. Miss Park opened her notebook. 2 counseling slots each session. 1 for the child, 1 for the parent. Being labeled without a dad causes stress. The parent from that evening nodded, speaking firmly. I volunteer to staff the intake desk, and I propose 1 rule: no photographing parents, only children's hands holding their number cards. Jonathan wrote it down. Thank you. We will honor the rule of no faces, only hands, he said. Hands are meant to be held, not displayed online. The phone buzzed, non-stop. IR stock down 3.2% at market open. PR local blog headline, remorse or calculation. Legal reminder not to comment beyond agreed statement. Carmen spoke quietly. Permission to maintain silence. But tonight there's an invitation to a television panel. Thank you, Carmen. Please decline tonight. Jonathan answered. Our priority is planning with the hospital and school. The noon bell rang. Val ran out of 1B's gate, hair tousled, pulling her doll from the backpack just to hold it up. Uncle, I've been waiting, she said, panting. Jonathan bent down to eye level. Thank you for waiting for me, he said. Today we'll be home for lunch right on time. Isabel stood nearby, shading her eyes. I'm so glad you arrived on time, she said. Pick up. One line on the card had become a deed in motion. On the refrigerator, the magnet 1000, medication, had been moved down to 12:30, lunch. Jonathan set white plates, poured warm water. Val placed last night's paper leaf next to her mother's plate. Isabel looked at them both, her eyes moist yet calm. Thank you, both of you, she said. Jonathan nodded. We'll go slowly, he replied. At home, going slowly was a skill. The phone rang. The chair on the line. Mr. Hale, one more condition from the budget committee within 72 hours. Please present a small matching fund from an outside partner to mitigate risk. It needn't be large, but a partner must be named. Jonathan paused. Understood, sir. I'll do my best within the time frame. After the call, he looked at the card on the table. Stay. Be near still there. With a marker, he added a new word at the top. Knock. That afternoon, the office door ajar, Jonathan started a video call with Dr. Ramirez. Doctor, could St. Michael's connect me with a community partner to co-sign the matching fund? For example, St. Bridget's Church or the local Women's Guild. Ramirez nodded. St. Bridget's runs a breakfast fund. Very disciplined. I'll gladly connect you. Also, there's a seamstresses guild led by Lucia, who once donated fabric for pediatric blankets. Please open those doors for me this afternoon, Jonathan said. Of course, Ramirez smiled. We have 72 hours. I'll call right away. Night fell. Jonathan sat at the table with his fountain pen and thick paper. He wrote a short letter to Lucia of the Seamstresses Guild and to the pastor of St. Bridget's. He promised little. He described the pilot, gave just enough numbers, and asked for a symbolic matching share to unlock the larger fund. The lamplight glowed over the wet blue ink. Isabel passed by, then stopped. May I add a note about the childcare corner? I believe mothers will feel reassured. Your suggestion is very valuable, Jonathan said. He added a line. Childcare corner staffed by volunteers. Rule no faces, only hands. Scene 11. Arresting note church bells. Early the next morning, the bells of St. Bridget's rang 3 short chimes. The phone buzzed. Pastor, please come by at 930. We are willing to listen. Jonathan slipped the rag doll into his suit pocket, turned his watch face inward, and carried the sealed envelope. He spoke softly to Val. I'm going out to knock on a door. I'll be back in time for lunch. I wish you luck, Val said, slipping a paper leaf into his pocket. The vote had already opened the first door. The rest would be about knocking gently, patiently, on the others. The church bell echoed long, and the story paused on the stone steps, where a courteous man raised his hand to ring again. The bell tolled 3 short times. The red brick hallway was still damp. On the wall hung a bulletin for the breakfast fund. Jonathan turned his steel watch inward, holding the envelope with the handwritten letter. The pastor stepped out, dressed in black, his hand warm. Welcome, Mr. Hale. Please join me for tea, he said. Inside the small parlor, the scent of beeswax candles mixed with old wood. Jonathan placed the envelope on the table. Father, allow me to briefly present the HHI pilot and the need for a symbolic matching fund within 72 hours, he began clearly. The pastor listened, nodding. The church does not do advertising, and we do not want the faces of the vulnerable on the news. he said. Father, we commit to the rule no faces, only hands, and no logos in the clinic area. Jonathan replied, the church may also hold a seat on the Community Oversight Committee. At the round wooden table, 4 members of the breakfast fund sat neatly. The treasurer opened her ledger. Sir, what about sustainability? Ma'am, the program has a 12-month sunset clause. If KPIs are unmet, it will end automatically, Jonathan said. A teacher asked. How will children's privacy be protected? Sir, only anonymous data. If any photos are taken, only hands holding number cards. Jonathan answered. The pastor asked the final question. The church will not be branded, correct? Completely correct, Father. We ask only to co-sign in order to unlock the matching fund, Jonathan said. The air eased as the words settled into concrete rules. The treasurer wrote in the ledger. Her voice firm. Saint Fortier, Bridget's church will match $15,000 and provide 200 breakfasts for families attending Saturday clinics. Conditions: no logos, community audit rights. Jonathan stood, bowing his head. I gratefully acknowledge this. The pastor smiled kindly. Please call the community program Little Leaf. That is the blessing of a child in your home. Jonathan looked at Val's paper leaf in his wallet and nodded. I accept, Father. The phone buzzed Isabel. I feel a little faint. I've sat down. Val is calling Nurse Linda. Jonathan drew a breath. Father, I must return to check on my family's health. I will come back with the signed memorandum, he said. Go, your family needs you, the pastor nodded. Val opened the door, her eyes worried. Isabel sat in a chair, her hand on her chest, her face pale but conscious. Nurse Linda was already there, checking her blood pressure, her glucose. Just a slight drop from hunger, Linda said. Please eat something soft right away. Jonathan poured hot porridge, pulled a chair for Isabel. He placed the 3-word card in front of her. Pick up. Stay. Be near. Thank you, Isabel said softly. We will go slowly, Jonathan replied, keeping his voice low. An unscheduled event was still part of caring for one another. That afternoon, the upstairs room above the laundry smelled of fresh fabric. Lucia, her gray hair pinned back, tested a thread's tip. Around the table, 4 seamstresses in aprons. We heard Dr. Ramirez speak about the pilot, Lucia began. Sir, we do not do charity with photographs. We can contribute labor hours and some money if children and mothers are respected. Ma'am, we agree, Jonathan said. Please tell me your specific requirements. Lucia raised 3 fingers. First, minimum pay for the childcare worker. Second, fabric and soft toys must be bought at fair price, not donated free. Third, a skills class for parents on cardiac care at home. Ma'am, I accept all, Jonathan replied. Funding will come from the reallocated budget. I will also contribute personally to begin. Lucia opened a tin box, pulling out a sheet titled Seamstresses Guild, matching letter. We will match $5,000 and 200 labor hours under the same conditions as St. Bridget's, she said. Then she pinned a small pincushion onto Jonathan's suit pocket. This is our deposit. Please keep it until the official signing. She smiled. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, ladies. Jonathan bowed. A small pincushion weighed as much as a promise. The phone buzzed nonstop. Blog A. CEO buying back his conscience. Forum B. No more ad money, so now he plays charity. Carmen texted. PR advises continued silence. IR notes fluctuation -4.1%, then recovering to -2.8%. Legal reminds to control statements in community meetings. Thank you, Carmen. Jonathan typed. Please send scanned commitments from St. Bridget's and the Seamstresses Guild to the chair. Note current matching fund is $20,000 plus 200 labor hours plus 200 breakfasts. On the table sat chicken porridge and soft-boiled eggs. The magnet 1000 medication had been moved down to 7:30 p.m. Rest. ChatGPT, said. Val placed the paper leaf beside Isabel's bowl. May I read aloud the 3 words on the card for you? Uncle Val asked, her voice solemn. Pick up, stay, be near. Isabel smiled, her hand resting lightly on her belly. I feel at peace, she said. Jonathan answered slowly. Thank you, both of you. The phone rang. The chair spoke briefly. Mr. Hale, I appreciate the progress. The committee requests one more condition, not just matching funds, but an operating partner must sign an MOU within 48 hours. Jonathan looked at the pincushion on his pocket. Sir, I will work with St. Bridget's and the Seamstresses Guild to sign preliminary MOUs within the deadline, he said. 70. 2 hours had become 48. The door was ajar. The hinges needed better oil. Carmen spread the MOU template across the table. Scope, KPIs, the rule: no faces, only hands, responsibilities of both parties, sunset clause. Isabel added a line about the childcare corner. Val drew a leaf in the margin. Jonathan reviewed each section, adjusting the wording with courtesy, to the Reverend, to Miss Lucia. He set the rag doll atop the papers as a makeshift paperweight. In that kitchen, dry documents were anchored by the hands of 4 people. From the ink marks, a community began to take form. On the table lay 2 MOUs not yet stamped. The clock read 1040 p.m. Jonathan snapped photos and sent them to the pastor and to Lucia. Please review. Tomorrow morning I will bring them for signature. He turned off the kitchen light. At the window, the drizzle had stopped. Uncle, tomorrow please remember to take the doll with you so you'll be strong, Val whispered. Thank you, my dear. I will bring it, Jonathan replied. Outside, the streetlight stood still. Inside, 2 MOUs rested beside the 3-word card. The night closed like a sealed envelope, waiting for morning's stamp. Sunlight slanted through the kitchen window. On the table lay 2 MOUs, a fountain pen, and a small red seal Carmen had brought to test a draft. The 3-word card sat on top: pick up, stay, be near. I'll take the papers to the church first, Jonathan said. I wish you a smooth signing, Isabel answered, her hand resting gently on her belly. I'd like to send the doll with you, so you'll be strong, Val said solemnly. Jonathan turned his steel watch inward and placed the doll into his vest pocket. The morning began with small things in their right places. The parlor smelled of old wood. The pastor read each line slowly. I note the rule: no faces, only hands, the Community Oversight Committee, and the Sunset Clause, he said. Thank you, Father, Jonathan replied. The pastor pressed the parish seal onto the corner of the paper, firm. The red ink spread like a small flower. May God protect these small hands, he smiled. Carmen took a single photograph, the pastor's hand and Jonathan's hand holding the edge of the paper together. No faces were in the frame. Late afternoon, Lucia reviewed every line. Minimum pay. Fair purchase. Skills class. I agree, she said, signing firmly. Jonathan signed. The pincushion on Jonathan's vest was removed by Lucia and placed on the table. We'll take back our deposit and send the guild's seal, she smiled. She pressed the round green stamp. The ink smelled both fresh and final. May Little Leaf grow steadily. Thank you, Miss Lucia, and all of you, Jonathan bowed. The second condition clicked into place like a thread drawn taut. The phone buzzed. The chair on screen. Mr. Hale, I've received both MOUs. The matching requirement has been met. The committee acknowledges your effort. Thank you, sir, Jonathan said. We will begin with St. Michael this weekend. Please send a communications plan once the first clinic date is scheduled, the chair replied. Yes, sir. Another lock clicked shut. The church bell rang once. The courtyard of St. Michael's had shaded trees. The intake desk was set against the wall. The parent who had once questioned him now stood behind it, handing out numbered cards. Nurse Linda placed smiley stickers on children's hands. Miss Park arranged the childcare corner with soft toys. Jonathan set up gloves, pulled a chair into the shade for Isabel, placed warm water and soft bread. Val wore a small volunteer badge, standing by the signboard. "Let us begin, Doctor," Ramirez said warmly. Carmen lifted her camera, reminding, "No faces, only hands." Footsteps, papers, small bursts of children's laughter. A morning with gentle order. A 6-year-old boy placed his hand on the monitor. The reading flashed abnormal. "Son, please come next door so I can listen more closely to your heart," Dr. Ramirez said at eye level. The boy's mother gripped her bag strap. "Doctor, where can my little girl sit?" "Ma'am, the child care corner is here," Linda pointed. "Please don't worry." Jonathan stepped back, not intruding, only sliding another chair closer. The very first case was caught on time. This was the reason for all the ballots and seals. After the morning session, they ate sandwiches and hot soup under the awning. On the table, the hospital's in-house bulletin carried a hurried line, "Little Leaf, HHI pilot with St. Michael." "Everyone, let me repeat the rules: no logos in clinic areas, anonymized data. Photos only of hands," Carmen said. The parent who had once questioned placed her hand on the paper. "Thank you for keeping your promise. We thank you for asking the hard question," Jonathan replied. Isabel looked out toward the courtyard. Val collected the number cards, counting carefully before placing them into a box. A program had a name. A family had a rhythm. Night. The kitchen glowed warm. The magnet, 1000. Medication, hung beside a new note. Saturday. Little Leaf. Val placed the doll on the table, looking at Jonathan. "Uncle, tonight I'd like to ask something," she said, her voice clear. "I'm listening," Jonathan replied, sitting up straight. "I would like to call you Dad. If Mom agrees, would you agree too?" Isabel looked at Jonathan, her gaze calm and warm. "If you feel it is right, I would be honored," she said. Jonathan drew a steady breath. He looked at the card. Pick up, stay, be near. Then he looked at the small hand resting beside the doll. "I would be honored," he said to Isabel, then turned to Val. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be your dad." Val nodded hard. "Thank you, Dad." Words shifted in the kitchen, as if chairs had been drawn closer. The next day, they hung a small frame in the kitchen. No faces. Only 3 hands placed on the 3-word card. Beneath it, an ultrasound photo held up by a magnet. Isabel touched the ultrasound. "I'm so grateful we went slowly," she said. "We will continue to go slowly," Jonathan replied. Val stuck the paper leaf beside the frame. "I wish our family to grow like Little Leaf," she said. PR message. The hospital's internal post is spreading. Major press reaching out. Error. Shares rebounded 0.9% after news of the pilot, with matching support. Legal. Stay with script, no interviews. Official announcement only with Q1 data. "Thank you, everyone," Jonathan typed. "We'll keep order and let the hands speak." At the corporate level, silence at the right time was also a kind of promise. Late at night. The kitchen dark. Only the baseboard light glowing. Jonathan stood before the framed picture. He turned his steel watch inward, as he had from the first night in the ER. He placed the rag doll into the drawer beside his fountain pen, closing it softly. From the next room came Isabel's steady breathing, Val's small shifting in sleep. No fireworks. Only a new rhythm sealed by small, repeated acts. Outside, the night wind was gentle. On the table, the card lay beneath the paper leaf.